Okay, I think we've got the majority of people who are joining us in today. So good morning and welcome. I'm Gillian Martin, MSP for Aberdeenshire East, but also the convener of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee. So thanks to everyone for joining us for the launch of Champions for Change. This is a collaborative project developed by NFU Scotland and the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and it aims to highlight examples of best agricultural practice and champion a change of direction in our current system of land management subsidies to meet twin challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, subjects both very close to my heart and those of my committee members. Before we get started, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, just to let everyone know what the score is there. So we've got 1 hour for the seminar, and we'll start with opening statements. We've got the Minister for the Natural Environment, Mary Goujon, and we've got the Scottish Wildlife Trust representing NFU Scotland. And then we'll move on to a Q&A with our panel at around 11:20. So if you want to submit a question, you'll find that there's a Q&A box. You can do that at any time throughout the session. Our moderators will choose questions to put to the panel. What I'd be very helpful is if when you put in a question, if you could indicate who you want your question to be addressed to, and make sure you put in your name and which organisation you're representing, if any. That'd be very helpful. And we'll try and get through as many questions as possible in the time that we've got available. So for panelists, they all know that they have to keep themselves muted as per. We're all getting used to that until I actually come to you, and I'll just come to you by name and put questions to you. Anyone who is tweeting and has got comments to make on Twitter, we've got a hashtag. It's hashtag Champions for Change. And if you tag NFU Scotland and Scottish Wildlife Trust as well, that's great. It means we'll get a little more traction there. So we've got a great panel. We've got 3 farmers who provided case studies for this project to discuss how farmers and crofters can deliver biodiversity and climate benefits and overcome any barriers. But firstly, I'd like to invite the Minister for Rural Affairs and the Natural Environment, Mary Goujon MSP, to make an opening statement and outline the Scottish Government's view on the project. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks very much for that, Gillian. And good morning to everyone. And thank you. I want to thank the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the NFUS for inviting me along today. And also thank them both for putting together this initiative, because when I first heard about it, I was keen to be involved because I think it's a fantastic initiative and a really positive one. And I think that the ambition and positivity behind it is really inspiring and will inspire change. And I really hope that other land managers will follow in the footsteps of this. So I'm really excited to see how this develops. Now, I think that these approaches proposed through Champions for Change are crucial to address the twin challenges that we face of the global climate and biodiversity emergencies, which are threatening our landscape. But we also can't forget that agriculture does have a positive story to tell. We've seen greenhouse gas emissions reduced by nearly 30% since 1990. And of course, agriculture continues to help wider Scotland through low carbon farming, from managing soils, along with planting trees, restoring peatlands, and the generation of renewable energy. But of course, I think like areas right across Scotland, we need to do more. There isn't one magic solution to this, but I do genuinely believe that it's by that collaborative working together that we will be able to make that change happen. And obviously, I want to ensure that, and I'm sure that everybody else does too, that Scotland can lead by example and that we will lead by example. I think we certainly have the tools to do that. We have the people with drive and initiative, and we also have fantastic natural capital. And I think that's appreciated now probably more so than ever, because obviously COVID has connected people with nature and really reminding us why we have to tackle the climate emergency and the loss of biodiversity, as well as doing that hugely important job of reconnecting people with their food producers. So even more than that, I mean, our landscape mitigates against climate change through its soils, through peatland, through trees, and obviously also a wide range of species within its ecosystems. And of course, the Scottish Government has a role within that too. Now, we published our environmental strategy earlier this year, and the strategy sets out our guiding ambitions for Scotland's environment and our role in tackling global environmental challenges. And for the first time, the environment strategy creates that overarching framework, bringing together Scotland's strategies and plans on the environment and climate change. We continue to address biodiversity loss through our biodiversity strategy, and we'll publish the third land use strategy next year. And of course, we're supporting farmers, crofters and land managers in practical ways to try and meet Scotland's climate ambitions, as well as delivering wider biodiversity and environmental benefits. We continue to try and support behavioural change through the Farming for a Better Climate initiative and the Farm Advisory Service. And also this year, we ran the pilot, the Sustainable Agricultural Capital Grant Scheme, and there were over 3,500 applications to that. And with that fund, we will hope it will help farmers to invest in specific items of agricultural equipment to support them in the delivery of direct and indirect greenhouse gas reductions. In terms of other work that we've done, we've also established a programme board to consider implementation of the Beef Suckler Climate Group report. And that obviously delivers a set of practical recommended actions that will lower our carbon footprint, enhance the environment and boost business. We've also committed to further farmer-led groups to look at actions that can be undertaken by other sectors in agriculture. And we've also recently announced the new Arable Group, which will be chaired by Andrew Moyer, and there will also be a group on high nature value farming. Alongside that work, we're also developing our future policy. So the Farming and Food Production Future Policy Group was established following a parliamentary debate in January last year. And the group's recommendations, along with those of others, such as, I've already mentioned the Suckler Beef Climate Group, will inform the framework for future rural policy in Scotland, and really underpinning the development of policies to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, help support sustainable food production, and of course, help build thriving rural communities. And finally, I just want to remind everyone that this year we will also be publishing an update to the current climate change plan, and that'll be the next step in our journey to reach net zero by 2045. And that update will reflect the increase in ambition that's needed right across Scotland in order for us to achieve those world-leading climate targets that we have in as fair and just a way as possible. But of course, there is always much more to be done. But there are common themes between this initiative and Scottish Government actions, that being the partnership working and leadership. We need individuals to take leadership and create a pathway to sustainable land management that helps to mitigate the global effects of climate change and really encourages biodiversity to flourish in Scotland. And I think it's leaders like yourselves are in a unique position to set an example and really encourage others to follow, protecting our soils, landscapes and forests. So I think certainly my colleagues and I are really keen to collaborate with others and learn from their experiences. And conversations about our natural environment obviously aren't ever going to work if they're only one-sided. And I'm really lucky in my role in that it's given me the opportunity to see firsthand how intertwined agriculture, forestry, land use and our natural environment are. And also when I was researching this initiative, I noticed that, of course, many farmers and crofters are starting to diversify their businesses and supporting local rural communities, all while considering and limiting the environmental impact of these changes. And I've been amazed and obviously delighted to see so many people planting trees and trying to improve biodiversity. All of these changes are win-wins because they can support income and revenue, they support local communities as well as benefiting the environment. And I believe that by working together, sharing all of these ideas and knowledge, we really can create our own success. So once again, thank you so much for having me along today, and I'll finish there just so that we can get to all the speakers and get through to the Q&A, where I'm sure there'll be lots of questions.
Thank you very much, Mary. And our next speaker is Joe Pike, who is the Chief Executive of the Scottish Wildlife Trust. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and I'm delighted to be at this event today, bringing farmers and conservationists together, and really grateful to both Gillian and Marie Goujon for making time in their really busy schedules today. And as the Minister just said, there was some really important messages there that I'm sure will feed into the conversation as this event progresses. So last year, Scott Walker, the Chief Executive of NFU Scotland, and I were brainstorming some ideas around how we could showcase what farmers provide that go beyond food, whether that's improved flood protection, habitat for wildlife, or locking up carbon. And we came up with the idea of setting up an alternative farmers market inside the Scottish Parliament. Everybody loves a farmers market, I certainly do. So we set our teams the task of actually designing an alternative farmers market. And plans were underway, but then along came the pandemic, and of course we had to adapt. So this event today is the result of that. Now, you all know that food production, both here in Scotland and globally, is dependent on a healthy natural environment. And well-designed schemes can help reward farmers financially for producing high-quality food, whilst at the same time protecting and restoring our natural environment. And it definitely doesn't have to be an either-or. But what is clear is that at this point in time, when we face an unprecedented loss of biodiversity and the equally pressing challenge of climate change, is that here and across the world, we need to think differently about how we produce food. So the Scottish Wildlife Trust firmly believes that farmers can and indeed must be at the heart of the solution to these twin challenges. And NFU Scotland agrees with that, which is why, of course, we've come together to launch this initiative, Champions for Change. And it won't just be about this event today. Over the next few months, we'll be publishing a series of case studies and video pieces, which we hope will spark further discussion that you can all also be part of. Now, we want to work with farmers to champion the changes necessary to respond to the twin challenges that I've mentioned that are absolutely inextricably interlinked. And we know that if we continue in the current vein, where environmental practices are not as well supported as they need to be, then one thing's for sure, and that's that, you know, we'll all be losers. And we know that many farmers do want to champion change. On a Scotland-wide scale, we need to see measures that will improve ecological connectivity, for example, because we know that the natural environment is more resilient when it's connected. We'd like to see more woodlands, native woodlands on farms, restoration of peatlands, improvement in soil health, restoration of the riparian zone next to riverbanks, and all sorts of things. But of course, in practice, all of these things are very location specific. So whilst in one area, the priority might be pollinators, in another, it might be water quality. And so it's obvious that farmers must be at the heart of these discussions. And as I said, it's not a choice between good environmental stewardship and productivity. There are lots of win-wins here. You know, for example, soil testing on farms gives farmers information about the inputs such as fertilizers, which in turn allows them to reduce those, thereby saving money for farm businesses at the same time as reducing environmental impacts that are negative. And planting trees can afford protection for crops and livestock, as well as a diversified income source for a farm business, all whilst locking up carbon and providing vital habitat for biodiversity. So initiatives like this one, Champions for Change, will be important, but the change will require clear leadership and messaging from government. And that's why NFU Scotland and the Scottish Wildlife Trust have agreed 3 things that we're jointly calling on the Scottish Government for, which we hope will bring clarity to what's required. Now, Martin Kennedy, the Vice President for NFU Scotland, is going to outline these 3 asks in a moment. But before I hand over to Martin, I'd just like to emphasise that a new direction in farm subsidies will support farmers to deliver a whole host of public benefits in return for these payments. And over the next few years, consumers are likely to become much better informed about these issues. And so this could become the direction of future competition between food producers, especially, for example, if carbon pricing is also introduced globally. So incentivising the right practices will ensure that Scottish farmers are competitive globally in terms of the biodiversity crisis and climate change. And that's got to be good for farmers, for rural jobs, for our fight against climate change, and for biodiversity. So we hope this will be a win-win for everybody. And we hope that today's session will make a useful contribution towards this important ongoing conversation. And I very much look forward to the rest of the conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jo. And a reminder to everyone to go to the Q&A and put questions to our panellists. I'm going to hand over now to Martin Kennedy, the Vice President of NFU Scotland, as I'm sure you all know, but also a beef and sheep farmer in Aberfeldy. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Gillian. As a membership organisation, NFU Scotland are delighted to see the launch of this joint initiative between Scottish Wildlife Trust and ourselves, Champions for Change. As primary producers, this gives us farmers and crofters the opportunity to highlight not only what we've done so far in terms of the environment and emissions reduction, as the Minister has said earlier on, but also how, given the right tools, we can do more to help the environment and mitigate against climate change. We as a union have said for quite some time now that there are three top priorities. The first one is, of course, our ability to produce that top quality food that we're so used to in a sustainable manner. Doing this prevents us from actually offshoring our emissions and our environmental standards to food producers in other parts of the globe that certainly don't share our concerns at the present time. The second one is looking at ways that we can further enhance the environment to reverse the decline in biodiversity. And the third one is leading the way in climate change mitigation. All three of these topics should be at the top of the agenda. I believe achieving these goals gives Scotland the chance to showcase a food production system that will be the envy of most, if not all, countries across the world. Sadly, though, it's not as simple as that. Scotland is starting off in a good position. In global terms, nobody can really deny that. However, we still have a long way to go. And during this partnership, we, with the Scottish Wildlife Trust, have cited three key asks that will be vital to the success of achieving these goals. The first one is we need clarity from the Scottish Government on the direction of travel for future agriculture and land management policy in terms of what will be expected of us to deliver positive productivity and environmental outcomes. Given the well talked about green recovery, clarity is absolutely vital. The second one is we need a commitment to fair long-term funding schemes that deliver environmental benefit to allow farmers to deliver biodiversity and climate targets. And thirdly, we need a commitment to investing in natural capital. Supporting the rural economy and genuine environmental improvement will play a key role in delivering that recovery from COVID-19 that we're all aspiring to get to. We've seen over the past 2 or 3 years a whole raft of reports coming out as how we should progress with future policy, but as yet we still do not know what form it will take. One thing that is absolutely vital is our need for us to take the whole industry with us. The agricultural industry in Scotland is the one industry that can play an increasingly positive role in terms of environmental enhancement and climate change mitigation. However, the cost of this cannot simply be picked up by the farmer or the crofter. The measures that we as farmers take to achieve these goals are of huge value to the public, so it's in everyone's interest our industry is supported through this transition of change. At home here, we have been involved in agri-environment schemes since they started way back in the 80s with the very first Breadalbane ESA, right through to the current agri-environment and climate scheme. But it's only a limited number of people who can get in because of the scoring system. We shouldn't discourage people from getting involved because they can't get enough points. We should allow them to deliver what they can and be recognised for it. This is where getting the right future policy in place has the potential to create the biggest change by incentivising people to get involved and allowing them to take part in the goals we're trying to achieve. Soil health and soil testing should be an easy win. I know with what we've done here on the farm at home in recent years has helped not only the bottom line of the business, but also has helped the productivity in the farm, in line with what Jo has said earlier on. Many farmers have been paying attention to soil health for a long time now, particularly in the arable sector, who have led the industry with the use of technology and soil mapping and variable rate application. However, there are many more of us that could get more involved in using technology to improve on our soil health and carbon capture. My glass is always half full, unless it's somebody else's round usually, But I'm sure we as farmers and crofters will all play our part in getting where we need to be, but we need to have the right tools with the right funding and the right tools in the toolbox with the correct funding to get there. So thank you. I think we're all in this together.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, Martin. So we're going to move on to our Q&A discussion, and questions are coming in through the Q&A function on the meeting, so keep them coming. So we're going to be talking about how we can support farmers and crofters to deliver biodiversity and climate benefits. And we've got a couple of additional farmers to join us on our panel. I'm going to put my first questions to them, but first of all, I'll introduce them. We've got Willie Thompson, who is the chairman of the Combinable Crops Committee at NFU Scotland and a farmer at Wheatrig Farm. It's an arable unit in East Lothian. And we've also got Kerry Coombs, who's a trustee of Scottish Wildlife Trust and a tenant farmer in South Lanarkshire. He farms 900 acres at Dunsire in the southern end of the Pentland Hills. So I'd like to ask the first question to Willie. So Willie, as an arable farmer, you're undertaking measures to increase pollinators on your farm. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and do you think this kind of action is normal practice in most farms? And if not, how can we encourage more farms to do it? Willie.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. On our farm, we have a rotation that includes oilseed rape, which is obviously a pollinating source for wildlife. But I'm also in the agri-environment scheme, and in that we grow a cover crop through the summer, which flowers and has a pollen source for insects right through the summer. On top of that, we also, any corners of the farms or fields that aren't productive, we put on a pollinating mix as well. And that's done out of our own pocket, just because we think it's partly it's good for the soil structure, but also it has added benefit for wildlife. And it's been recognised actually that we've, by a beekeeper from Edinburgh who comes out and has about 40 hives on our farm that live here all year, that we are a recognised source of pollinators for his business as a commercial business that he runs. And also in the middle of the summer, in the land we have at North Berwick, there is traffic stops to see the fields, purple fields full of Phacelia. So, you know, it does get favourable comment from far and wide. Is it typical? I would say the oilseed rape part is, because it's an established part of many rotations around here. The agri-environment part, maybe not. As Martin touched on, because it's a competitive process to get into agri-environment, not everyone can get in. So that probably does limit the amount of growers who can provide these benefits. So we're doing our part, as also we do soil testing. We're in our 10th year of doing that, precision inputs of all our fertiliser and seed and lime. We test the organic matters of our soils. We use minimum cultivation, so we're not destroying soil structure too much. So, you know, and that is on a commercial farm. I do that over the land at a farm. Some of it's tenanted, some of it's owned, some of it's in partnership with our landlord, and some of it is contracted land as well. So I treat all the land the same and try and take the same care across the whole acreage that we're doing.
Thanks very much, Willie. And I'm going to ask Kerry. Kerry, you've got a view that you treat your farm unit as an ecosystem, with numerous biodiversity projects running. The same question to you. Can you tell us more about what this means for your farming practices, and what can we do to encourage these kind of actions under a new agricultural policy? Kerry.
Thank you, Gillian, and good morning, everybody. First, if I might briefly endorse everything that's been said so far. I think I take this whole thing very, very seriously. I'm not naturally an optimist. I'm quite pessimistic about the future. We know we have a biodiversity crisis, a climate crisis. We potentially have a food crisis too. But these are all part of the same thing. And I always like one of my favorite sayings was that the food is the closest part to the environment we will get, because we actually eat it. Anyway, on what we do here at Weston by what I mean by we take the farm to be an ecosystem is I think something I'd like to say that probably all farmers are actually practical ecologists. They might not refer to themselves in that sense, but that's what they do. They manage and manipulate an ecosystem. And they're actually very, very good at it. Some might be better than others, and we all have a long way to go, but that's essentially what farmers do. And by focusing on certain food products that we produce, because that's our income, we inherently challenge biodiversity. Farming is inherently challenging what you might call the natural world, and it's our duty and what we have to do in the future is possibly get a better balance going forward, a better balance between what we have been doing and what we need to do in the future to resolve some of these crises. Here at Western, we've been very enthusiastic users of agri-environment schemes for many years now. We are organic farmers, which we'd like to think encourages us to work with natural processes. We have a lowland raised bog, which we manage, which of course is crucial for people, in terms of peatland management and carbon management. We planted trees, we've planted hedges, and we're very proud of about 30 acres of species-rich meadows we've planted, established, and managed, and it makes bloody good sheep hay, by the way. And in amongst that, we have our pedigree shorthorn cattle and the sheep. So I think the schemes that we've had in the past have been very useful. I take up the points that Martin has said about it has been limited. You have to stack up the points, and it's been very competitive. And I think that's an issue going forward. Every farmer has to be enabled to join in this process going forward. And another point I would like to make about the economics, because a lot of this is about economics, is farmers, apart from a certain amount of support we get, is essentially about what we can sell. We're looking here to provide other outcomes. If we go away and buy a bull and we keep it and we spend several thousand quid on a bull, and we don't get calves on the ground for another year, 9 months a year, and then we take another 2 years to sell them. All this takes time. We're planning ahead. That bull is potentially investing for 10 years down the line. If we're going to be supported to deliver other outcomes, we need a long-term outlook. Agri-environment schemes have been good, but they generally run for 5 years. It's quite difficult to plan your project, your management, if you're worried at the end of 5 years that you're changing your managing practices potentially quite significantly. Farmers need security. And all this high-level rhetoric is to be welcomed. It's great, but we do need something put in place that gives us security to plan for the future. So that's I'll hand back to Gillian now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And following on from that, I think the first question is a kind of combination question from quite a lot of particular NFU members who are all asking a very similar question. So this is not assigned to any one person, because it's been a very common question that's come through, and it's for the whole panel. And it's, what does the panel think about the role of capital grant funding in reducing on-farm emissions and promoting biodiversity? For example, precision farming technologies to reduce inputs, and what other measures could support farmers and crofters to undertake these actions? I think what I'm going to do is go to the farmers first on this, and then come to the Minister and Joe. So can I come to Martin first?
Yes, thank you, Gillian. I think the capital grant measures are part of the solution, but it's not all of the solution. I think when you see the recent Agricultural Transformation Fund application that went in, it was seriously oversubscribed. So what that highlights is farmers and crofters are very keen to look at things that's going to help when it comes to efficiencies and emissions. But it's only part of, I think it's only part of the whole raft of measures that needs to be taken into account. I think we've got to take a really holistic view, overarching everything here when it comes to emissions, biodiversity and our environmental standards and climate change mitigation, food production. We've got to, Scotland is actually starting off in a good position, but there's a whole raft of measures that we can look forward to. And as Kerry has said, allowing every farmer and crofter to get involved in these schemes that can highlight what they can do is absolutely critical. We want the whole industry to drive forward here, but there is a number of barriers that's in place. From a tenanted situation, Joe mentioned earlier on about planting trees. That's a big challenge if you're a tenant farmer. It's probably a bigger challenge if you're a crofter that's involved in a grazings committee that has grazing clerks to speak to. You've got the commission, the whole crofting regulation and crofting laws, another layer of bureaucracy. There's a number of barriers for crofters to get involved in some of these things. So I think it's the capital grant system is capital grant applications and things we can do is definitely a positive step we can take, but I think it's one of a whole suite of measures that we've to look at.
Willie, would you like to give your thoughts on this?
Yes, hi there. The capital grant scheme, from my point of view in the combinable crops, is welcome if money's coming into agriculture, but from where we're standing, it wasn't particularly well targeted at our sector, and a lot of the options there were a lot of farmers are already doing them, and there's a natural evolution when you make these investments that when machinery comes worn out, then you will spend the money on a newer, more up-to-date model with all the tools that you need. I think we've really got to look at what was in these measures and recognise that it was a pilot. I mean, as NFUS, we did submit a lot of suggestions that could for capital options. Quite a lot of them from our sector didn't get taken up, and especially speaking to the guys in the potato and soft fruit sectors, they are very keen on extra refrigeration and that they can do it in an energy efficient way and reduce their energy usage on that. So of course it's welcome. Money coming into the Scottish agriculture is welcome, but better targeting and more thought and rolling out what the lessons we've learned from the pilot. That would be my take on it. But I'm not knocking it. Just let's build on what's there already.
Kerry, have you got any thoughts on this?
Not a lot I can add to that really, except to say going forward, these something like precision farming technology, it's great, but as Martin says, on its own, it's not necessary. It's got to be aligned with strategic objectives. So if it's helping to achieve something within the strategy, then it's to be welcomed.
Can I come to the Minister now for thoughts on this?
Absolutely, thanks for that. And I would completely appreciate the points that have been made by some of the other panelists there, because I think it was Martin that said that, well, this might be a part of the solution, but it's certainly not all of it. Again, I mean, it is a pilot scheme. We know that there was a lot of people who would have been interested in it, and it won't reach everyone initially, but I think that's where it's really important for us to monitor it, to see how it works, the impact, and get the feedback on that, because that will obviously help inform where we move forward from that. Because again, I think I mentioned when I was speaking at the start there, we had over 3,500 applications, so it shows that the level of interest there. So I think it's one element. I think it's important that we undertake these pilot projects, but we fully understand that's not the complete picture, but we need to be able to implement these, see how they work, and take any learning from that and see where we go from there.
Thank you. And Joe?
Thanks, Gillian. I mean, I would just echo the messages that have already been emphasised by Martin, by Carey and Willie, about the importance for a holistic approach and obviously targeted support. I think that alignment with the overarching strategic framework is what's really important, first of all, and the longer term view to enable farmers, every farmer, as Carey said before, to be part of this solution. So I think that's all I would add.
Thank you very much. Right, so we have a direct question to the Minister from Davy McCracken, who is in our audience today. Davy says, most of the ongoing actions and groups the Minister has mentioned are quite rightly focused more specifically on climate change. But other than name checking biodiversity, what actions are going to ensure that active management more specifically for biodiversity can occur? For example, the Sickler Beef Climate Group is focused on just that with little biodiversity mention, says. So Minister, your thoughts on that?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, I would say that, and what I tried to make clear in the statement at the start is that we don't see the two things in isolation. I mean, climate and biodiversity are absolutely intrinsically linked. And I think any measures that we take to try and tackle the climate emergency will hopefully enhance our biodiversity too. I mean, there's a number of specific actions that we're undertaking as a government in relation to biodiversity, and we'll have a number of projects underway. I mean, we've seen from a number of reports that have been published recently, whether that's from the State of Nature report, the threats, the number of species that we have in danger of extinction. We have specific projects underway in an attempt to tackle that, and we've committed monies through the Biodiversity Challenge Fund as well to try and address specifically biodiversity related issues. But again, these are all completely interlinked. And I think that's also where, I mean, it mentions the Beef Suckler Climate Group report, but there's also the Farming for 1.5 report as well, which had a lot of strong recommendations within that. So I think that between that, the Food and Farm and Production Group, the Beef Suckler Climate Group report as well, all of these actions will help inform where we go from here to tackle these issues. And I think, yeah, I'm sure everybody here would agree that intrinsically linked these issues. We don't see one in isolation of the other, and all the actions will hopefully that we're proposing to take and looking to take will help to tackle that.
Thank you. Got a question for our three farmers from Anna Alamand, and she asks, what do you consider the top key tools required by farmers? So I'll come to Carey first.
Sorry, the top three tools.
What do you consider the top key tools? Did I say the top key tools required by farmers?
Apart from tractors. I think something going forward that we need to that needs to be developed if we're to improve in terms of our environmental performance. One is, I think, is being developed is payment by outcomes, rather than a process that we're paid at the start to deliver something. We're paid by actually what we deliver. I think this is in initial stages, and I think as a tool it will be extremely useful. I think we're a long way from that I'm aware of is something that we can really deliver effectively. But I think that's one thing. The other thing I think is which is associated really is a sort of metrics, a common metric across farming that measures sustainability. We don't. It's part of the same story, really. It's measuring our sustainability. I think this is in the very initial stages. I hope that kind of answers what the sort of the question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Same question to Willie, the top key tools.
Yes, I was trying to write down three, but thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, I mean, the key thing for me is information, and that is, by that I mean the baseline data that we can inform our decisions and management practices on. That could be the soil testing to get our fertilizer nutrient status. It might be the soil organic matter. That might be an ongoing thing. How do we measure the carbon that we're capturing or releasing, whatever it may be? But we need to have that baseline data so we can see the progress that we're making. And on the back of that, we also need the technology and skills to implement the actions that we arrive at from that data. So widespread soil testing, I think, would be a massive step forward. I mean, many of us have been doing it for a long time, but I think it needs to become almost standard practice if we want to move forward as a whole, whatever sector you're in and wherever you are in Scotland.
Thanks, Willie. And now to Martin.
Thanks, Gillian. Yes, I think there's one key tool, more than a whole raft of them. The one key tool that is definitely required is the future policy direction that we're looking to achieve. The future policy will give us the opportunity to take these measures that Willie's talking about. If we get the future policy with support and direction that enables us to take the holistic approach that I'm looking at, that helps us be more productive and improve our productivity with agriculture, allows us to do what we can do with climate change mitigation and take that opportunity to enhance the environment. That's all about having the correct future policy designed that enables the whole of the industry to take part in.
Right, we've now got a question directly to the Minister, and it's from Lucy Sumsian. Hopefully I've said your name correctly there, Lucy. It says, with a renewed focus on biodiversity, will the Scottish Government undertake to encourage local authorities to resurrect local biodiversity partnerships, or do they foresee the proposed regional land use partnerships fulfilling that role? And if so, how will they be resourced to do so? So quite a big question there, for you, really putting you on the spot there, Minister, but over to you.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll necessarily be able, like you say, it is a big question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of that. I mean, obviously we have the commitment to establish regional land use partnerships, which, because of course the scale of the challenges that we have and that we have to implement, we need to be able to look at that on a landscape scale to make sure that we can tackle that as best we can. And sorry, what was the connection there between whether the rural land use partnerships would include a theme on biodiversity? Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll just go over it again. So do you foresee the regional land use partnerships fulfilling the role of local biodiversity partnerships, and how will they be resourced if so?
Well, I would say with especially the rural land use partnerships, I mean, we'd be we're still considering the Scottish Land Commission's report on that and exactly how all of that works. So I think that's probably at too early a stage for me to say exactly what that will encompass or what the pilot projects will cover. And in relation to the biodiversity partnerships and local authorities, I think, happy to take a look at that and consider it. But I mean, we do have our biodiversity strategy in place, and I talked about the biodiversity challenge funds that we have there as well. And there's a number of different projects ongoing, but as to how that might interlink with overall land use partnerships, I think that's one point for me to go back and look at.
Right, we have a question that's, again, this is a sort of like combined question that's been put to us by a lot of people in the chat. And it's a general question on how can we support farmers better to work collaboratively so that they can work at large scale to deliver for biodiversity and climate change. I think I'll come to Jo first, and then I'll go to our three farmers and then get the Minister to give her reflections on that. So working collaboratively, I guess, first of all, the very fact that we're doing this today is a collaboration, but I'll go to Jo.
Thanks, Gillian. Absolutely. I think going back to the point that's just been made about regional land use partnerships, we would see these as being a real opportunity for farmers to have a very strong voice in helping to take a landscape scale view of what needs to happen, the kind of holistic approach that Martin alluded to earlier on. And we would like to see that in the clarity of future policy support and long-term funding, we would like to see collaboration between and across farms in a certain area incentivized and properly recognized as well. So yeah, I think that's a real opportunity there.
Willie?
just unmuting there. I was until recently the chairman of the Lothian Monitor Farm group, and that was a collaboration between an arable farm and the next door farm, which is a livestock farm, and they jointly put in an agri-environment application, and they were successful. So the Monitor Farm Network has been a fantastic tool for Scottish farmers for knowledge exchange and transfer. And there's the strategic farm, which is also funded by HDB, taking place in Fife, and that's looking into a lot of best practice for reduced tillage growing of arable crops. So actual funding, I'm not sure, but the Monitor Farm program has huge value and worth, and adds a lot of value to everyone who participates in it. So I would really encourage continued funding along that. It's great for getting farmers together, and the knowledge exchange that happens is phenomenal. So I would go along that line.
Thank you. And I'll come to Kerry and then Martin. Kerry.
Thank you. Well, we all know farmers are quite independent-minded and like to get on by themselves. But I think the point that Willie's made is that farmers are also pretty good at cooperating. I'm part of what is known as the Clyde Valley Wader Initiative, which is supported by the RIS scheme, and involves also support from the Scottish Agricultural College. And the success, is extraordinary. The willingness for farmers to come together to monitor and research and then improve the environment for waders, for curlews and lappers and things is quite extraordinary, really. The enthusiasm is there. So although we're independent-minded, I think that the proof is that, when minded to, we can be pretty good at coming together. I think these sort of schemes that Willie was talking about, and like the RIS scheme that I'm involved with, are just the machinery, if you like, the platform on which we can be enabled to do this.
And Martin?
Yes, I probably don't really have an awful lot to add. I think it's all been said, but I think it's about dialogue, it's about communication, it's about organisations coming together. As you said earlier on, the whole point of this joint venture is about seeing how we can get a collaborative approach to how we get the right outcomes. And when it comes to future agri-environment schemes, if we go right back to the first one we were involved in, which was the very first Breadalbin ESA, that was a collaborative approach with a number of farmers that was speaking together to see how we can help the environment, and there was funding available to do that. And that's maybe we should be going back to that sort of catchment area process where we'll have corridors where we can assist the farms by even fencing off areas so we can have wildlife corridors. All these things could be in place, but that's about dialogue, it's about communication between organisations, and as Willie said, it's about communication between farmers as well.
And to the Minister, I mean, where does the Scottish Government come in this? I mean, can that be the sort of thing that's facilitated by the Scottish Government to help farmers collaborate?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where I think we're keen to support any initiative that sees that happen. And I think that's why, just as Martin said there, this one is so important, because I think that's what's absolutely vital to making all of this work, and that farmers are at the forefront of it and collaborating with each other and sharing that experience. Willie talked about the Monitor Farm. I visited one of the Monitor farms near me, just outside Forfar, and I think it was amazing to see them. First of all, the amount of people that would come along to the meetings, but hearing their experience of the other farmers that were attending who wouldn't necessarily have engaged otherwise. And I think the Monitor farms have been brilliant in that respect and in sharing that experience, because collaboration is absolutely key. So I think it's about looking at all these things, and as Joe talked about earlier as well, utilising the opportunities that are there with regional land use partnerships as well, and the voices that can be part of that process too, I think will be vital in this. And I think for government's role, we want to be able to enable that and facilitate that and help share those experiences as much as we possibly can.
Right, well, I think we're probably going to have one last question from our audience, and then I'll come to you for closing remarks. So I'm going to put this question to you all from Caroline Miller. And Caroline's asking, what role do you think consumer-facing farmers welcoming the public onto farms, running agritourism businesses can play to communicate what farmers are doing to enhance the environment and protect the biodiversity. So again, I'll start with the farmers, and then I'll come to Joe and then the ministers. So if I go to Kerry first.
I think it's absolutely crucial, and I think any farmer who invites the public onto the land in any form, whether it's in meetings or as an open farm, I think is to be applauded, particularly for children as well. It's not something I've been heavily involved in, but communication between the population and the farming community is absolutely key.
Thank you. And Martin.
Yes, I think Caroline's spot on here. I think when it comes to facing the consumer, we should be embracing the general public on farm at every opportunity we can possibly do. We're involved in agri-tourism here. It plays a big part of the business, although sadly this year it certainly has not done that. But last year we did Open Farm Sunday, and I think we got as much out of that as what the people that were coming onto farm did. It was a fantastic experience. It was great to do. I'm not saying everybody's in a position to be able to do that, but it was the sort of the yearning for knowledge of what actually happens on farm, and we've actually missed a trick here. And when we're talking about collaboration, I really think a lot of our organisations should get together and get food production standards, the environment back in the school curriculum as a national curriculum, because I think it's so important, particularly coming through COVID, a green recovery we're trying to get to. People need to know everything about food production, and I think education will play a big part in this. But facing the consumer, we should embrace that at every opportunity.
Totally agree, and in particular the point that was made about kids. Just before I come to Will, I would just say that school's not the only vehicle as well. As somebody that used to help in the rainbows and the brownies, that anything you can do with the youth groups, they're absolutely champing at the bit to have ideas. So maybe that's something you can think about as well. Willie. We appear to have lost you slightly, Willie. I don't know whether if you maybe take your video off and we can just hear you better. But while you do that, I'll maybe come to Joe.
No, thanks, Gillian. I mean, just to echo the points that have been made, I think farmers can be brilliant ambassadors and educators. And I mean, dare I say it, I don't think it's actually just for children. I think that as a society, we've largely lost the connection between ourselves and where our food comes from, in the same way as we've lost a lot of that connection between ourselves and nature. So I really think there's huge potential there to play a role.
And finally to the Minister.
I would agree with everything that's been said. That's probably my most straightforward answer. But yeah, in terms of what Joe said about farmers being brilliant ambassadors, I think they're the best ambassadors. And I think that's also at the heart of, you know, what we've been trying to develop as in helping Scotland become a good food nation. It's about having that knowledge that people fully understand where their food comes from. And I think that by being able to visit local farms and see where their food's produced and how all that ties into the food system, as well as what we look to do to encourage local food to be eaten locally and enter that local food system. For example, through the Food for Life scheme that we have with, that we encourage local authorities to sign up to, because that has so many benefits. I mean, for the health of kids, first of all, but it's also good for the farmers. It's good for local communities and the local economy too. So there's so many benefits to come from that, from having that education, and really, yeah, everyone from kids to, as Joe says, you know, we need all people being able to go out and visit and be invested in that process and understand where their food comes from, because yeah, that's absolutely vital.
Right, so we're in our final 5 minutes, and I'd like to invite our representatives from the NFU, Willie and Martin, to give their final thoughts on sort of the main takeaways from the discussion that we've had this morning. So if I come to Martin first, and then I'll come to Willie.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. Well, I think the discussion has been extremely interesting. I think the important thing is, where do we go from here? And my view is, where we do go from here is, this probably lies with the Scottish Government now. We've had a whole raft of reports, as I said earlier on, has come out. We do have, it's fantastic to see collaboration, you know, between Scottish Wildlife Trust and ourselves, trying to see that, you know, trying to achieve the same goals. but we need to get something in place now that highlights this long-term policy that Kerry alluded to earlier on. We need that. Farming is a long-term game. We're farming for generations to come in some cases, not just for the next year or the following. So it is a long-term game, and we need a long-term commitment to how policy is going to allow us to take that holistic approach and be the major part of the solution as we come out of this COVID-19 dreadful pandemic.
Thanks, Martin. And Willie, you're back, and hopefully we can hear you perfectly. So Willie, your reflections on the main takeaways from today. I need to get someone to sort out rural broadband, and that's all I can say.
I was going to say connectivity would play a big part in how we go forward.
We can maybe take Willie freezing as a sign that we need to get better connectivity. Okay, I'll come now to our representatives, the Scottish Wildlife Trust. If I can come to Joe first, and then to Kerry on your main takeaways from today. Joe.
Thank you, Gillian. I would endorse what Martin has just said there about what we're jointly calling for from the Scottish Government, which I think will unlock what happens next. And I think long-term thinking is absolutely crucial to that. We're about to come into the year where Scotland will see the most important climate change summit since Paris take place in Glasgow. And come January, which is only a few weeks away, we'll also be entering into the UN's decade of ecosystem restoration. So there's never been a more important time. And I think the Scottish Government has a really important and essential sort of opportunity to act here.
I'll come to Kerry and then we'll try and get Willie back.
The main point I think I'd like to put, main emphasis I'd like to put, is to really, really take the situation we're in seriously. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and potentially I think we've got a food crisis globally if we don't get our act together. So I really, really can't emphasize that high strongly enough, and the linkages between them. There's been talk about, well-recognised talk about soil here. Well, we as farmers depend on soil for our food. It's now also well recognised that if we're going to draw down carbon, we need healthy soils, carbon storage soil. When we talk about biodiversity, it's not just about a fluffy squirrel on the cover of the SWT magazine. It's about the life in the soil. It's about that's the root of it. So that sort of is an emphasis of the linkages between the three titles, if you like, that we're discussing today.
And Willie, your main reflections before the gremlins get to you again?
Yeah, I found this morning being hugely encouraging, and I think more discussions along these lines are going to be welcome. You can tell by the interaction from the Q&A panel and everything coming at this has been fantastic. And a point that Joe struck on it very, very early on, that it's not either or, production or the environment, and that is very much the mindset we have as Scottish farmers. I think we're moving, definitely a big mindset change, moving to we've got to look after what we've got as best we can. And I think that you'll find a receptive audience within farmers are having a more and more environmental slant on their production methods. Huge amount of work still to be done, but I feel we're on the right track, but it's got to be backed up by the right policies, and let's get on with it. That's my take on it. So, okay.
Thank you very much. So just as in closing, before I hand over to Martin at the end, there's a few things just to let our audience know that following today's launch of the Champions for Change, NFU Scotland Scottish Wildlife Trust will be publishing a range of case studies from Martin, Willie, Kerry and other farmers and crofters that will be highlighting and celebrating examples of good practice on farm. So have a look for these on social media. And we're very keen, NFU Scotland and Scottish Wildlife Trust, keen to continue this discussion. There's been lots of activity on Twitter. Please continue engaging. Obviously, we couldn't get to all your questions today, but our panelists have probably been looking at them, and there's a lot of things that from those questions that our panelists will be digesting over the coming days and weeks and months. So I'm going to hand over to Martin Kennedy, who's going to round off today's session. Martin.
Okay, thanks very much, Gillian. Yeah, just a few words of thanks here. I think first of all to Minister for Rural Affairs and Natural Environment, Marie Goujon, for coming along, and particularly for her supportive remarks earlier on, highlighting, you know, where we actually are with Scottish farming. We shouldn't forget the amount of good we're already doing. I think we're doing a lot. Yes, we can do more, but in global terms, we're actually in a good position. Also to Joe for Scottish Wildlife Trust, it's fantastic to see you know, two organisations like Scottish Wildlife Trust and National Farmers Union of Scotland coming together like this and looking for this, you know, highlighting this Champions for Change, how we can actually progress to getting to where we all want to get to. So it's great. Thanks very much for playing such a huge role in this. Willie, it's great to have the arable point of view. Very often we don't see the arable point of view taken on board enough, and I think we should recognise that the huge value that our arable farmers are doing and the willingness that you are to take on board more to enhance the environment. Also, Kerry, you brought a different aspect towards it, and looking at your farm as an ecosystem, I think it's a great way to look at it. All too often we get told, sometimes we're told we're livestock farmers, sometimes we're told we're grassland farmers. Probably we're carbon farmers, because if we look after the carbon in our soils, well, that will assist us when it comes to being more productive on farms. So I think we've got to look at it from all these angles. I'd also like to thank everybody else for coming along and taking part and asking these questions. There are a whole raft of questions, and it's good to see the enthusiasm and having so many people coming on to a webinar like this. And a particular thank you to the behind the scenes staff from Scottish Wildlife Trust and NFU Scotland for putting all this together, because it doesn't just happen like that. It's all right for me, I just turn up and speak and it's no problem, but there's a lot of work goes in behind the scenes with this. And last but by no means least, Gillian, for chairing this today and keeping it all together. So thanks everybody for being involved, and I'm sure this will be a start of many discussions to come. Okay, so thank you everyone.
Thank you everyone, that is us. Great discussion. Thank you everyone.